The hearing will come to order, and this afternoon we welcome Secretary Shaun Donovan to the subcommittee for the Oversight hearing on housing issues, and welcome. Good to see you after your skiing trip and all those good things. Yeah. You and Pastor can go travel somewhere now too. So, okay. You going to Iowa? Good, good. Due to a scheduling conflict, we had to postpone our FY 2015 general budget hearing for HUD until next Thursday, April 10th. Today we'll review the budget request for public and Indian housing programs, learn about your ideas for programs reforms, and look at the challenge of meeting long-term commitments in the project-based rental assistance account. For a number of years, we've seen renewals of the Voucher program and other housing programs steadily crowd out other high-priority programs. This year is no different. HUD's request for public and Indian housing programs grow at $1.1 billion, or 4.4%, over the enacted level. At the same time, community planning and development programs, for example, see a reduction of $9.8 million in the budget request. The Ryan Murray budget agreement for FY 14 and 15 reflects a broad bipartisan agreement that we must live by with relatively flat budgets this year and next year and actually well into the future. Chairman Rogers and Chairwoman Mikulski have stated very publicly that they will abide by the Ryan Murray agreement for FY 15 in spite of the administration's multi-billion-dollar gimmicks across the budget. In the case of this subcommittee, the President's budget offloads billions of transportation spending to the mandatory side. As we consider your request for fiscal year 2015, the committee will move forward honoring the bipartisan agreement to effectively freeze the top line for both domestic and defense spending, and we will not use gimmicks to increase spending. To meet this goal, we need to have an honest discussion about how we continue to serve our most vulnerable citizens while focusing on hard choices and cost-saving reforms. Sticking to the budget agreement means that when some programs grow, others must be cut back. You've been on the job now for 5 years, and we appreciate your leadership and open communication with the committee. Very much appreciated. I have confidence that your remaining years, hopefully years, as Secretary, will finally bring in some urgently needed reforms so that HUD's housing programs effectively serve the national interest while protecting the taxpayer. I look forward to your testimony and would like to recognize my good friend and ranking member, Mr. Pastor, for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The program we are reviewing today are some of the most important programs in HUD's portfolio. Public housing and Section 8 house more than 5 million tenants, many of whom are for vulnerable populations. More than half of the tenants in public housing are elderly or disabled. These programs are the largest in HUD's portfolio. Together, public housing and Section 8 rental assistance represent $36.3 billion, or 85.9% of the fiscal year 2015 budget request. We have a responsibility and a commitment to ensure that these programs run efficiently while having a positive impact on tenants' lives. I look forward to hearing an update on 2 of the administration's initiatives in this area, the Choice Neighborhood Initiative and the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. I look forward to the Secretary's testimony this afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pastor. Following your opening statement, members will be recognized for 5 minutes, 5-minute rounds of questioning based on seniority here on the committee. Secretary Donovan, you're recognized for your opening statement, and your full statement will be submitted for the record.
Chairman Latham, Ranking Member Pastor, members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss the Department of Housing and Urban Development's public housing programs with a specific focus on the innovative proposals contained in our FY 2015 budget. We come together today at an important time for the American people. Although our nation has come a long way since the depths of an historic economic crisis, there are still too many families struggling to get by. One example, according to HUD's latest worst-case housing needs study, In 2011, roughly 8.5 million families spent more than 50% of their income on rent and/or lived in substandard housing. This was a jump of more than 43% since 2007, the largest increase over a 4-year period in the quarter-century history of the survey. Recognizing that so many are in need, HUD's fiscal year 2015 budget is designed to build ladders of opportunity so that families from all backgrounds have a fair chance to lift themselves up if they work hard and play by the rules. Public housing is at the heart of these efforts because it provides affordable rental homes to low-income families. HUD's proposed budget dedicates a significant amount of funding to support this critically important work by addressing capital needs to preserve existing units, empowering families with the resources to secure affordable units, and ensuring that once they obtain affordable housing, these families have the support to grow and thrive. And with all of these efforts, we're looking for new and innovative ways to make a difference on the ground, especially in tight fiscal times. Case in point is our rental assistance demonstration, which is helping public housing authorities and owners of assisted housing tap the private market to make physical improvements to their units. With a backlog of $26 billion in capital needs for public housing, this effort couldn't be more timely. That's why this budget proposes legislative changes to RAD that will eliminate the 60,000 unit cap and allow for a greater portion of public housing stock to convert. Specifically, these measures will enable HUD to address the more than 180,000 units of applications that we have on hand today and create approximately $6 billion in private financing for the recapitalization of public housing at no cost to the taxpayer. The budget also provides $10 million for a targeted expansion of RAD to public housing properties in promise zones or other high-priority communities. In total, this means more quality, affordable housing options for families. And to help them seize these opportunities, the budget includes $20 billion for the Housing Choice Voucher program to help more than 2.2 million low-income families afford decent housing in neighborhoods of their choice. In addition, the budget provides 40,000 special purpose vouchers, including 10,000 new vouchers targeted to homeless veterans, and also includes $9.7 billion for the project-based rental assistance program to maintain affordable rental housing for 1.2 million families. And once families are in these units, we want to see them succeed. This is an area where we're doing some of our most innovative work. For example, the budget provides $25 million for the Evidence-Based Jobs Plus program, a proven model for increasing the employment and earnings of public housing residents. They receive on-site employment and training services, financial incentives that encourage work, and neighbor-to-neighbor information sharing about job openings, training, and other employment-related opportunities. The Opportunity Growth and Security Initiative includes an additional $125 million for Jobs Plus, which together with the base funds in the budget could assist up to 50,000 participants. Another proposal in the budget provides flexibility to help PHAs improve supportive services for assisted families. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which connects residents to resources and services that lead to economic independence and self-sufficiency, will be consolidated and aligned to enable PHAs to better serve voucher and public housing residents. And as part of the forthcoming legislative package, we propose expanding our Moving to Work program to help even more public housing authorities design and test innovative, local strategies aimed at helping residents succeed. In total, with all these efforts, we're looking for creative ways to achieve our desired results in tough fiscal times. We do so with a primary goal in mind, to give more Americans a fair chance to thrive if they work hard. HUD's fiscal year 2015 budget is designed to do just that, with our innovative public housing programs at the center of this work. We're eager to discuss these items with Congress as you work through the appropriations process and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. The request refers to a comprehensive package of legislative reforms that you will be submitting to the authorizing committees this spring, my understanding. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I think we can all agree it's the right time for reforms to ensure that the HUD housing assistance programs serve the neediest populations, control costs, and lead to greater self-sufficiency for the residents. However, we've heard promises to work with the authorizers in the past, and including last year's hearing. So I hope you can appreciate the fact we may be somewhat skeptical as to whether they're really serious about getting reform. What makes you think that they're you have a better opportunity this year, and what do you see as some of the barriers that might pop up?
So first of all, I would say we were very encouraged by some of the advances we did make in the 2014 budget. There's hundreds of millions of dollars of savings in the voucher program and in other programs based on the work that we did with you, but also with the authorizing committee. Having said that, we literally, on the day we introduced the budget, briefed the authorizing committees. I personally made calls to the authorizers to encourage them to work with us. We are actively engaged in discussions on potential legislation this fall. Obviously, you know better than I do that in an election year and with other challenges, we can't guarantee any legislation getting done, but we will do everything we can to make progress. I would also note we've proposed a range of legislative changes which we think are appropriate for an appropriations bill. That's why we divided the legislative proposals. Some we included language with the budget. Others we're saving for what we consider an authorizing package later. And we look forward to working directly with the committee on things that clearly fall within appropriations language.
Well, it really goes to my next question about the selection of programs that you want us to expand, but not the authorizers, and whether you're talking about the RAD or the rent policy demonstrations, change in medical deductions and authority for the authorities to merge their operating and capital funds. Will constraining renewal costs be one of your goals as far as reforming the voucher system? Tell us what you're proposing there.
Absolutely. We believe with the changes that we were able to make working with you in the 2014 budget, we already expect savings in the voucher program of just over $200 million in 2015. In addition to that, we believe that the changes we've proposed, for example, to medical deductions, will save at least tens of millions of dollars more. The other thing that I would point out, we have been working to move to a more efficient contracting model in our project-based Section 8 program over a number of years. We've actually run that competition twice, and lawsuits have delayed that. There is specific language that we've proposed in the budget that would clarify that we have the right to do this through a NOFA process, which we believe already and was confirmed by one judge in a prior court. If that language gets approved, we think we could save $100 million within the project-based Section 8 program next year.
Okay. In 2012, GAO reported to Congress that 20 different federal agencies administer 160 programs to support home ownership and rental housing. I just wonder, are you working within the administration to identify where there's duplication and any effort to consolidate programs so that the tax dollars served in the national interest rather than just duplicating programs? We've established a rental housing working group across the entire administration that has looked for ways to consolidate and also to better align programs. I would also point to RAD, which I mentioned earlier. RAD alone has already gotten applications that would consolidate almost entirely the Rent Sup program, and we're looking as well the potential to consolidate RAP and the mod rehab program. And with the right language and the lifting of the cap, we should be able to do that in the coming years. Well, I guess my question is, not to start another program necessarily when you have 160 of them there already. I mean, what are you talking about eliminating?
Well,
is there any report from this working group?
Be happy to provide more specifics about that. But again, we don't see RAD as a new program. It is using a time-tested Section 8 program and moving other programs that, frankly, I would call them orphan programs, small number, moving them into Section 8 to be able to truly consolidate them.
Okay. My time's expired. Mr. Pasteur.
Thank you. Chairman, Secretary, Rental Assistance Demonstration And the program allows public housing authorities to modernize and preserve existing housing by leveraging outside capital. As you said, it had a cap of 60,000.
That's right.
It was extended, I think, last year for 60,000 extended, and it's going to expire December 31st this year. And since you and the chairman were having a dialogue on RAD and some of the programs, and you alluded to some of the orphan programs, et cetera. But let me ask the question this way first. This program is really, it's in its infancy, at least. It took you time to get it going, and maybe a year in existence, maybe a year and a half in existence. What tools or what methods of evaluation have you compared it to, so that now you can say it's working, it's not working, we still have some glitches, so that we know, as you asked for further expansion, where we're at today.
Yeah. So, first of all, I think the two biggest indicators of success thus far, first, that despite a cap of 60,000 units, we have demand as of the end of last year for 3 times that. 180,000 units have applied, and we continue to hear significant demand beyond that. So obviously, if you put it this way, the housing authorities are voting with their feet and applying and really want to do this. Second,
let me ask a question. Why do you think the PHAs are using this mechanism to increase the demand?
So, two things I would say. One is that they're able to raise capital that far exceeds what they can do within their traditional means in the public housing program. Those 180,000 units could raise $6 billion of other private and public capital to help them do the repairs with no additional cost to the taxpayer. So that's an opportunity they just don't have anywhere else. And second, I believe it allows them to use a time-tested program, Section 8, that they understand, they know well because it's an existing time-tested program, that has lower regulatory burdens and other challenges relative to public housing, the traditional public housing program. So it has benefits administratively and in terms of efficiency for them. That's why I would go to the fundamental point. I don't see this as a demonstration in its infancy, because we're using programs that have been around for decades. Project-based Section 8, project-based vouchers are time-tested, and all we're really doing is converting them, not trying a new program or a new alternative.
In raising the capital, are these PHAs crowding out other low-income tax credit programs, or the market itself?
We heard some initial concern about that. What we've seen in practice is that only about 10% of the transactions are using the 9% credits, which are competitive. 30% of the projects are using what we call 4% tax credits, which are tax-exempt bonds with tax. Those have not been oversubscribed in states, and so it's not crowding out other. And the additional 60% of projects are just using private financing, whether through FHA or other sources. So there was some concern initially that it would be crowding out, but in practice, we haven't seen that extensively.
So the new demand for 180,000, the expansion to increase that number of units, is that generally throughout the country, or is there certain areas that are relying on this program or wanting this program to expand?
We have seen some variation, but every state in the country has housing authorities that have applied, and there is great demand in all regions of the country.
Well, you have PHAs that are larger than others. I mean, you probably have, as you well know, smaller ones and you have larger ones. Is the balance equal, or do you find that the larger, in more urban areas that are now using this program?
Interestingly, there was some expectation that the larger housing authorities would use it. It's really been the opposite. We have a disproportionate number of small and medium-sized housing authorities that are using the program. The percentage of units represented by small and medium-sized housing authorities is bigger than you would expect, given their representation in public housing overall.
I'll you, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Pastor. Mr. Dent is recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary.
Good to see you.
Included in the FY14 omnibus spending bill were a number of provisions designed to reduce administrative costs for public housing authorities. However, regulations for many of these reforms, such as the streamlined biennial inspection protocols, have not yet been issued by HUD. Can you tell me what your timetable is for writing the regulations necessary to implement these cost-saving measures?
Absolutely. One of the things that was very helpful in the way you all crafted the bill was you gave us the ability to implement these through notice. So we're literally, as we speak, drafting that notice. It will be issued this spring and allow us to go forward and start to realize those savings to some degree in 2014, but largely in 2015. We will then follow that notice with a full regulatory process, but it was extremely helpful that you gave us the ability to implement these through notice so that we could get going quickly. Obviously, the housing authorities are eager to get going on these, and they're looking forward to that notice.
Thank you. And also, Mr. Secretary, I understand that many public housing authorities across the country have coordinated with their state associations and elected representatives to develop proposals that are within HUD's regulatory authority to reduce administrative burdens and help them save some money. Several public housing authorities in my district are contemplating taking a similar approach, but they are discouraged by the response received by their counterparts, specifically in North Dakota and Virginia. What would you recommend is the most effective method by which these public housing authorities may propose time and money-saving suggestions to the department, and how would the department work to implement good ideas received from these public housing authorities? I just also point out, I do have the correspondence I saw from Senators Kane and Warner to you, I guess, is back in September, and then your response, I guess, is back in October back to them, and also a similar letter from Senator Heitkamp in January on the same issues.
Obviously, it will depend on the specifics of the issue, whether we have authority to implement it. But what I'd suggest is that we set up a follow-up meeting with your office, with the housing authorities, to sit down and to specifically discuss their ideas. We are preparing guidance that would provide greater flexibility through our own administrative authorities in a range of areas. We have a notice that we issued last year that did that, but we're looking at further steps, and so it would be a good time to do that.
Well, I'd very much like to take you up on your offer to sit down with some of my
Great.
housing authorities who have, I think, some very thoughtful ideas about how they could realize some greater efficiencies and, well, maximizing the number of people staying in public housing units. So I would appreciate that. And finally, on the issue of housing counseling, what can you tell us this year? How are we doing in terms of oversight and in terms of making sure that these programs are as effective as they can possibly be? I know we've had, not all home counseling programs are created equally. Some are better than others, and what are we doing to make sure that they're all living up to better standards? Again, some are doing quite well. There have been some reports a few years ago about some of the programs that weren't quite up to snuff.
Yep.
Can you fill us in?
We are in the process of developing a comprehensive testing regime for housing counselors. This was part of the HERO legislation that was passed, and is something that we are moving actively toward. The other thing I would mention, we are proposing an increase in housing counseling this year in our budget, along with an initiative in the Federal Housing Administration called HAWK, which will increase the use of counseling in order to not only help make sure families can stay in their homes. Typically what we see is a 30% better chance of staying in your home if you get counseling, but we also expect it to save between $1,000 and $2,000 alone for the taxpayer through safer loans and FHA. So we are expanding the use of counseling to better protect the FHA fund and expand access to credit.
Okay, I'll yield back then, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dent. Mr. Price is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. We're glad to have you here.
Good to be back.
Let me ask you a number of questions, I think most of which are straightforward and won't require too much elaboration, but they are nonetheless important questions that have been raised by various stakeholders and that I'm not certain I'm clear on what the department's position is. First, on these vouchers that were lost due to sequestration and that are being restored, there's some debate about whom those should go to, and the waiting lists, of course, are pretty long and compelling, but also there are specific populations, such as homeless persons, victims of domestic violence, people who otherwise might be institutionalized, people with disabilities, who arguably have a special claim or a special need on these restored vouchers. What is the department's position on this? How much leeway are you permitting, and to what extent are you directing the use of these vouchers?
Largely speaking, we leave local discretion to communities to determine their priorities. Each housing authority has their own plan with particular special priorities they may place based on local needs. So most of the additional vouchers that would be created are of that type. But we are proposing, as I mentioned in my testimony, 40,000 special purpose vouchers, 10,000 for homeless veterans, and 30,000 for what we call tenant protection vouchers, which are targeted for families that might otherwise lose their homes through opt-outs of other forms of housing or situations like that.
And what will be the plan for the distribution of those additional vouchers?
For the Vash vouchers specifically, the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing vouchers, we measure very carefully each year the need based on the number of homeless veterans, particularly chronically homeless veterans, and we match the distribution of those to need. Tenant protection vouchers go to where we have these specific cases. So in other words, if there is a building in one community that is leaving a program and residents are at risk of being evicted, we would provide those from HUD directly to those residents of that facility.
That would be a matter of HUD's determination, not necessarily an application process on the part of
Exactly. It's not. That's not competitive or anything like. And then finally, the bulk of these are distributed through formula that is set by appropriations through our regular distribution of renewal funds for Section 8 vouchers.
Presumably, if a local authority had a especially compelling case that needed to be brought to the department's attention, they'd be encouraged to do that.
You have, in past years, and we would want to continue this, provided some emergency funding. So, for example, the effects of sequestration last year meant that there were many housing authorities, almost 200, that ran out of reserves and needed some help in order to make sure they weren't evicting tenants. The flexibility you gave us allowed us to meet some of those special needs in the regular voucher renewal pod.
Let me turn to administrative fees. In the last 10 years, do you know how many public housing authorities have turned in their Section 8 program vouchers because there were simply insufficient funds to operate them? We hear about that, and of course it's extremely frustrating. What's the status of the administrative fee study that's being conducted by ABT, I understand, and what interim proposals is HUD advocating to help these programs survive?
I'm glad you asked about that because it is an area where I'm very concerned. Administrative fees fell to an all-time low last year, less than 70% of documented need. And although 2014 raised that to 75% proration, it is still too low. And in fact, we saw the effects of that. In 2013, for example, we saw the number of housing authorities that are turning back Vash vouchers. So these are housing authorities that are turning away new vouchers to help house homeless veterans. We saw the number of those housing authorities double last year. So we are very concerned about the administrative fees. On the administrative fee study, we have completed the work on 30 out of the 60 housing authorities that are part of the study. We will be providing by the end of this week a summary of that research. What it shows is that very well-run voucher programs need about 92% of the formula allocation that has traditionally been the level. And again, I would compare that to 2014's level of 75%. We are proposing to increase that substantially, but still not get up to 92% in our budget this year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess you may have already touched on it, was the Vash housers. Sorry, I'm on Mucinex, and sometimes it makes your tongue a little funky. It's a little head cold, and that's all on camera. That's great. The Vash, Veterans Assistance Supportive Vouchers. Am I saying it right? And I know you absolutely said it. That was one of the things I asked you about last year, is they were returning those vouchers because there just wasn't enough. And when you're talking about veterans, we're talking about needing wraparound services. It's extremely difficult, or I should say, it just takes a lot of time and effort to put together the wraparound services to make these work. And so the administrative fees are crucial. And to go from 68% to 75% in the Ryan Murray budget, I mean, I know you're putting together the study, and I'm curious as to when the study is going to be out. In addition, do you think the 75% reimbursement is enough for this year? Are we still going to see those vouchers returned?
Obviously, we don't know yet. We're going to be making the allocation in the next few months, and we'll wait and see. I'm hopeful that with a higher level of admin fees this year, although it's at 75%, that there will be fewer that turn them back. But it is still 75% proration is not enough for administrative fees. And look, this is a program that is working.
Yeah.
It is not only saving lives. We've reduced veterans' homelessness by 24% in the last 3 years. It's also saving money, because the alternative, when you have a chronically homeless veteran on the streets, they use emergency rooms, they go to prisons, they have all kinds of other impacts that have human costs, but also have economic costs to the taxpayer. And so we believe that this is an investment that is not only good for these veterans and good for our country, but good for taxpayers as well.
Do you think, so is it the fall that your study's expected to do, so that we at least know what our baseline should be?
Again, we have initial results we will be providing by the end of this week that shows, at least based on the first 30 housing authorities, that it's about 92% is an adequate level. But the full final study will be completed this year.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Good to see you.
Upon questioning from the esteemed ranking member, you were talking about the RAD program. Chicago's program has been approved, but as you talked about, there's a cap. You mentioned the demand's 180,000 and the cap is 60.
Yes.
I was just waiting for the magic language of your discussions about your desire or efforts within the agency to expand or lift the cap. Can you comment on that?
I would love to lift the cap. It is not something that's within my power without legislative authority, and something that we were hoping to get done this year in the budget. We can continue to make efforts with authorizers, but clearly the best opportunity is in the 2015 budget to lift that cap, and that's what the President's proposed.
And it's going to be part of your efforts as well?
Absolutely. It is proposed in our budget. We have continued to tell housing authorities like Chicago, which has the biggest application of any housing authority in the country, but just missed the 60,000 units. We've told them that we'll continue to process their applications in the hope that the cap will get lifted, but clearly it's not something within my power to be able to do. We need to work with the committee to lift that cap.
Sure. And my agency is a little concerned about something else. You were talking about moving to work. Obviously, the CHA is a moving to work agency, But in the budget request, HUD is given the authority to reduce funding for voucher renewal costs to individual public housing authorities as a result of cost savings for the enactment of Section 8 authorizing provisions. Now, I understand their need to cut costs, but this language seems pretty broad, and you're making some of these agencies nervous that they're going to lose some of these funds, excess funds.
Simply what we're trying to do there, Congressman, is to say where we achieve cost savings through making the program more efficient, streamlining, as we did last year in the bill, that we be able to apply those across the board, including MTW agencies. Traditionally, those kind of cost savings have had no effect on the funding levels for MTWs, and it only seemed fair to us to apply that even-handedly. If you have concerns that we make sure it's even-handedly, we'd be happy to work with you on revised language around that.
Well, how long do you think this process has gone on before this change? I mean, the way that, before you're talking about this proposed change. I guess the point is a lot of these agencies have built in their ability to do their work on this funding.
They have also, I think, to be fair, been protected from reductions or cuts that other housing authorities have had to bear more broadly. And again, agencies who aren't MTWs might ask, is it fair that they absorb more than, pro rata reduction of their fees, their renewal burden, because MTW agencies don't. And so that's why we included the provisions to be able to try to implement some of these fairly. We'd be happy to work with the committee. We're also, frankly, looking to expand the MTW program and have proposed that we do that in a way that hopefully the committee will be able to support.
In a way that protect the agencies, like my agency in particular. But we look forward to working with you to make sure, as you say, those are as fair as possible. It takes as little burden as we can from an agency that has an extraordinary demands in the city of Chicago.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to follow up on a couple things here with the Vash vouchers. It's easy to say, right? Anyway, there was a bureaucratic problem between VA and HUD. Has that been resolved, or can you give us a status of how they're?
I would tell you it may not be perfect everywhere around the country, but it is dramatically better. And what we are seeing is shorter amounts of time to get veterans referred and into housing. But perhaps most importantly, we've seen the percentage of veterans who are chronically homeless using Vash go up dramatically to where it's close to 70% of all those using Vash. And why is that important? Because Vash is sort of our Cadillac, if you will, of approaches. It is the most intensive services. It really works most effectively when we're working with the chronically homeless who may have long-term challenges with PTSD or mental illness, substance abuse, and too often with the vouchers were being used in a way that wasn't as efficient and as effective as possible, wasn't targeted in the best way. And not only are we getting the vouchers out faster, but we're also better targeting them. And what that means ultimately is that we're going to get more cost savings as well as really help more veterans get off the street with the vouchers.
Can you, and maybe for the record or something, give me the information breaking down between urban and rural areas? Rural people don't use Vash at all. I mean, it's not available, apparently. It doesn't work.
We have been making allocations in rural areas. We don't see, obviously, the same concentration of veterans in certain communities, but we have been making allocations in some, and we will certainly provide that information.
I mean, a lot of it's just the services in sparsely populated areas are not there. And the moving to work, Mr. Quigley was talking about. To date, there's no housing authority that's lost its status on the moving to work. It appears they're not all to be real high performers, like in Philadelphia, where there's a lot of corruption and ended up in receivership. and still retained its designation. Is there any standard as to who keeps it and who loses it?
We do have a set of standards that we will apply, and there are specific requirements.
What do you have to do to lose it?
So specifically in the Philadelphia example, they actually continued to perform based on their MTW agreement. Obviously, there were huge problems. That's why we went in and replaced the board. That's why we took them into receivership. But the types of problems they were experiencing were really about a housing authority director who, frankly, was out of control, and a board that wasn't overseeing that. With the changes that we made, we were still confident that they were performing on all the metrics that an MTW requires.
Okay. Burned up a lot of time here, but this a big question. In the past few years, as you're keenly aware, it's become nearly impossible to determine how many months of funding are provided by the request for the project-based rental assistance. One consistent theme of the administration's proposals is they always manage to push payment liabilities into future years in order to provide more room for spending in that budget year. We had short-term funding 2 years ago, then a hole in funding last year, and now this year we have a proposal to rebase contracts to the calendar year. This program is one of the cornerstones of federal affordable housing and a platform for critical policy innovations like the RAD program. I would hope you'd agree that the stability of the project-based rental assistance is too important to be, part of annual budget games. Once for all, can you tell us how many months of funding per contract are necessary to ensure stable, well-functioning project-based rental assistance program?
So from my perspective, what we are proposing this year is trying to do exactly what you said, which is to get us to a point where we will no longer have the question marks about whether funding is provided. And I will say this, Congressman, if you believe you can find an additional $1.3 billion this year that would bring us back to, quote-unquote, full funding based on the current system, we would take it, and we would be happy. But recognizing the budget challenges, what we are saying is rather than continuing to go through what we've gone through these last few years, where we're providing short funding, let's accept once and for all that we move to a system, which is how we do the voucher program, where we can provide funding for all the contracts on January 1st. There is a one-time savings from doing that, and then going forward, provide 12 months of funding.
It's also a huge hole the next year.
It actually creates no hole the next year. The exact 12 months of funding starting January 1st is $10.8 billion. Whatever starting point you begin with, if you stay with the current starting point, it would still be $10.8 billion in 2016. So this rebaselining creates no additional demand in 2016. All it does is move these contracts to a January 1st date, the same way that vouchers does, and gets you a one-time savings in this year. And I believe it will actually be better for the program because at least we're saying, okay, we've got a new baseline. We're going to try and provide 12 months of funding from that date, and that we know what it's going to be going forward, as opposed to the uncertainty. And as you know, there's lots of private financing that comes into these contracts, right? And the more uncertainty there is, the higher the interest rates, the more reserves they're going to require. So we really do believe that given the challenges that we have, again, I would be happy to take an additional $1.3 billion to get to full funding under the current timelines. But if that is not possible, which I think we can all agree is going to be extremely tough, we believe it's better to say, okay, let's reset the annual funding date. And to be very clear, it does not create any additional funding needs in future years. It does not shift any burden. 12 months of funding is 12 months of funding in 2016, no matter what the starting date is.
Okay, we will continue the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to have one more question on the RAD. In the 2015 budget request, you asked for an additional $10 million. Is that, what will that do to the RAD program in this fiscal year?
Well, the idea there, the vast majority of these conversions under RAD can be done with no additional funding. There are, however, a very limited number where either because they may be in high poverty communities where it's harder to attract private capital, they may be in rural communities where it's harder to get private financing, other challenges like that. We would attach a slight increase to the amount of money that can be provided through the public housing subsidy in order to make the renovation of those units possible. So it is a very targeted amount of money for a small number of the units converting to allow a RAD conversion and extensive renovation to be feasible.
The next generation management system has been a centerpiece of HUD's information technology transformation initiative efforts. The system, when operational, will consolidate many of the individual public housing IT systems into one holistic system. To date, HUD has spent more than $50 million on this effort. Can you give us an update on the progress of NGMS, Mr. Secretary?
Absolutely. The just getting the specifics here. So NGMS did become operational, the first module of it, which is the budget formulation and forecasting module, last August. In addition, the portfolio and risk management tool became operational in September. We are adding functionality and making changes. Both of those sort of modules of NGMS will be fully operational this year. And we're obviously continuing to add new functionality in other modules on an ongoing basis. But NGMS is operational. It is already adding value in the department.
Would you say 50% complete, 25? What percentage can you give me?
To be honest, Congressman, I'd like to
honesty,
get back to you with a more detailed analysis of that. I don't know off the top of my head what percentage I would say.
In the implementation and as you go forward, what is the relationship between the Public and Indian Housing and the Chief of Information Office on the project, and who has the final say on the scope of it?
So what we've done, as I think most technology projects of this scale, is to create a team that includes the information technology experts from the CIO office, along with program officials who have expertise about the way the program should run, to create a joint team that has oversight. Ultimately, the decisions are being made by the Deputy Secretary and by myself if there are disagreements within that team, but that joint team is managing the project and overseeing its implementation.
As you continue the implementation, when do you expect the core data infrastructure that houses the current public Indian housing centers and the voucher management system to be implemented? Or have you done that already?
So, in fact, that is already in place. The core data infrastructure is part of the PIH data warehouse. The important move that's still to come is that we're actually moving towards a single integrated data warehouse for all of HUD. But at this point, the core PIH data infrastructure is there and is already feeding into NGMS.
Could you give me a further definition of what's left to incorporate in the whole HUD house?
So, for example, we have certain grantees or entities, projects that receive funding from multiple HUD programs. Just to give you one example, where they may have public housing money but also have home money. There may be city entities that have their block grants but also are drawing other kinds of HUD funding as well. What a single integrated data warehouse will give us is the ability not just for all the PIH programs to talk to each other, but to actually have linkages between all the data across all of HUD's programs in a single warehouse. Right now, we have to basically create those linkages separately rather than having it all reside with single identifiers that go across all of HUD's programs.
Just take a minute, Mr. Chairman. So Phoenix has a housing authority, also receives CDBG monies and other HUD money. So then once everything is completed, HUD will have the information of all HUD funding for one particular municipality or agency.
Or a project, exactly, in a single integrated data warehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pasteur. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, let me ask you one very specific question following up on the discussion of the rental assistance demonstration. And then I want to move to choice neighborhoods, a key proposal in your budget. I'm inspired to ask this question by the situation of one of your applicants, the Fayetteville Housing Authority in our district, but I think it is reflective of a broader situation. That is, a certain number of these applications, and I understand maybe 115, 120,000 units outside the cap are at risk in this sense. We're talking about applications already received that depend on financing arrangements, where it's let's say a tax credit deal or another financing opportunity that may expire or terminate for those units that are outside the RAD cap. Any special plan for taking that into account or accommodating those situations? That really represents a lost opportunity.
It's a huge lost opportunity, and frankly, while that's a specific case with tax credits, every one of these transactions is bringing in some form of private financing, which is going to have some set of deadlines or risk. And so other than the first come, first served way that we did set up the list, I would be very hard pressed to say, you know, this deadline takes precedence over that one. The right way to solve this is to be able to lift the cap and allow these housing authorities to move forward. Because again, recognize what we're doing here is with not a single extra dime of taxpayer money, we are allowing the housing authorities to not only bring in billions of dollars of financing to create jobs, to improve the lives of residents, and every one of those 120,000 units that's waiting has a story. It may not be identical, but similar to the one that you're hearing from.
Well, an expiring tax credit is a pretty compelling story, but I'm aware it's not the only sort of situation we may be referring to here. And I of course agree with your basic conclusion that the solution to this is not to try to distinguish too finely among different classes of applicants, but really to get this cap lifted and get on with the program. There's clearly a huge demand and a huge need. Now let's talk about choice neighborhoods. That's a program, as you well know, to revitalize severely distressed public housing in the surrounding area. It's the successor of the Hope 6 program, which had a similar goal. Here, too, I have every reason to appreciate these programs. Raleigh, Durham, Fayetteville, these cities have benefited greatly.
Greatly, yep.
And in many instances have been model Hope 6 cities. Your 120 million, your request in this budget is 120 million for choice neighborhoods. I take it that would maybe be 4 projects
Roughly, yes.
In a year, yeah.
A number of planning grants, but in terms of implementation grants.
Right.
Correct.
And how does that compare to what Hope 6 was at its high point and the kind of progress we were able to make with that appropriation?
It's a smaller number of projects, to be frank.
Well,
and that's part of the reason we proposed.
Smaller is putting it mildly. What was the high water mark? Do you know?
In inflation-adjusted terms, I'm not sure, but I know that there was, I think, $400 to $500 million at least annually. 575 was the high point historically, and if you did it in today's dollars, it would be even higher.
So now we're talking 120. That's 4 projects if we're lucky, and even that represents an increase from last year's abysmally low appropriation.
Congressman, I would just add, this is one of the reasons why we thought it was important to include in the Opportunity, Security, and Growth Initiative an additional $280 million, because we agree with you. $120 million is not enough, and the President believes if we do some common sense things on reforming both mandatory and discretionary funding, some tax changes, we could fund things like choice neighborhoods that really make an enormous amount of sense in terms of creating growth and opportunity, creating jobs.
Yes, it does show what could be done if a kind of ideological rigidity around here were to be relaxed, and we were to have a more adequate budget. There's nothing anywhere else in the housing budget that comes close to choice neighborhoods, is there? I mean, I don't know what it would be. Nothing else that takes this kind of comprehensive approach. Just finally, I want to understand the handling of public housing here, and this is just a short, easy question, I think. Both of these programs, Hope 6, Choice Neighborhoods, both aim at revitalizing severely distressed public housing. As I understand, the requirements as to what kind of area would be cleared aren't exactly the same, and I'm not sure how the requirements as to what kind of housing replaces it, the kind of mix of housing that replaces it, is that the same? And of course, public housing is in big trouble here too. Very great area of need. Does the transition from Hope 6 to Choice Neighborhoods promise to alleviate that, or could it possibly make it worse? How is public housing treated, in other words?
So public housing continues to be the primary kind of goal, the revitalization of public housing of choice neighborhoods. We did include the ability to take a privately owned multifamily property and have it be the target of a choice neighborhoods grant. But I would say the other thing that we've done is build into choice neighborhoods in a way that some Hope 6s achieved, but not all of them, much more partnership from other agencies, so that we are seeing, for example, many of the choice neighborhoods are receiving Promise Neighborhoods grants from the Department of Education. They're receiving burn criminal justice investments from the Department of Justice. So much so that for every dollar we've put into choice neighborhoods implementation, we're raising $8 from other public and private sources. And that's what I really think goes to your point of nothing else quite has this catalytic impact that choice neighborhoods does, because we're able to leverage every dollar of federal money so effectively across both public and private dollars.
I've got, going back to our previous subject about project-based rental assistance, letter here from a whole list of different organizations and councils and groups that deal with this. And they basically are saying exactly what I'm talking about, is the fact that you're just shifting off the costs, another $1.1 billion in 16 that you're going to have to backfill to keep the programs going. Do you have any proposal for offsets, next in 16's budget, or are you going to have another gimmick, or?
So, Congressman, just to be clear, and we actually did reach out and talk to these groups and disabuse them of their mistaken view of this. To be clear about the way this works.
I'm sure they'll be happy to hear that.
Were they happy, Laura? Look, I think what they will tell you.
So they're all wrong, right?
No. What they will tell you, and what I would agree with, is if you can find an additional $1.3 billion, which
we have to do it next year. Then you're
here's the
can down the road.
No, so think about it this way: if the average start date for a contract now is in July, August of the year, right? And what we're saying, okay, we're going to find that extra $1.3 billion, fund every contract starting on average in July or August, whatever it might be. If you do that this year, right, and you say, how much will it cost to fund those contracts from July to July the next year, it's $10.8 billion. What we are saying is, given that we have not been able to do that for a number of years now, let's just all agree that we're going to change the system, move it to January 1st. That's the way the Section 8 system works. We have a one-time savings, which is basically taking the start dates from the average of July to January, and then forevermore, we will fund them January to January.
Which is a gimmick to spend on other new programs that you can grow, and then you're going to have to backfill again next year.
You never have to backfill it because every January you're funding for a year. So the same cost is $10.8 billion
You have to
next
come up
year.
with about $1.1 billion more in 16.
You don't. You don't, because if we were to go
You're
back,
magical. You really are. No.
what it is doing is shifting the funding dates later in 2015. So it is a one-time savings that never has to be made up, as long as you're funding from January to January the following year. So it's not a gimmick. We think it's just acknowledging the fact of the challenge you've had the last few years, which is we've never been able to get back to full funding on the contract year that currently exists. And if you can find $1.3 billion to get us to full funding this year, we'd love to take it, and then we'll have a $10.8 billion cost in 16 as well. But we just think that's going to be hard, given the challenges that you have. And we think it's better, rather than having this uncertainty, to just say, let's shift it to January 1 for every contract, and all agree that going forward, that will be the new program year, just as we do with vouchers. And that will have it will create a cost of $10.8 billion, which is the same 12 months of funding that you would need if your starting date was an average of July or whatever else it might be.
Okay, then, can you commit to full funding then in 2016 budget proposal?
I would love to be able to commit to full funding. We believe that it will make it easier to do full funding in the following year.
So you're going to find the money then?
I will do everything I can to find the money. Look, Congressman, I used to run this program at HUD. I think it's been a huge problem. I think it's been a huge problem, the uncertainty that we've had.
Right.
And we worked hard to get extra money in the Recovery Act to bring it back to full funding. But that has then eroded after these years. And again, I really mean it. If we could find the $1.3 billion this year to get back to full funding on the current cycle that we have, that would be ideal. That would be my first choice. But I think it's better to go to this new funding year than to continue to have the kind of uncertainty we've had the last few years, where it's partial funding each year, it's not quite enough. And that actually creates more uncertainty for lenders, for others. If we're not going to be able to get to the full funding, we believe that this is a second best alternative. It's the right thing to do to say, okay, let's go to January 1st and let's reset. Let's have a new year, just the way vouchers are done, and let's all commit that we're going to try to keep it at that going forward. And it really doesn't create the extra cost that, I know there has been confusion about this, and I understand why it gives the appearance that it might, but it actually doesn't if we stick to that new year.
Okay. Thank you for that answer.
More than you wanted, right?
Mr. Pasteur.
I went to Arizona State where 1 + 1 was 2.
All right.
Mr. Donovan's from New York, so I don't know the math. We'll have to go back.
Let's get out the race.
Harvard math.
Oh, he's a Harvard man? Oh, okay.
We've apparently been using a matchbox set and cars at the office to show people how this actually works.
Well, good. Well, you may have to come back and show me choice neighborhoods with cars and buildings, how this thing's going to work.
Okay.
With a lot of members, saw that Hope 6 was very successful. And I have to tell you that at least in Arizona, we had very successful Hope 6 projects, not only in Phoenix, but in Tucson and other places. So there was a little bit of reluctance to all of a sudden have those success stories not being able to be expanded to other housing projects in other parts of metropolitan Maricopa County or Pima County. And maybe what you can explain to me that As I look at not Hope 6, but choice neighborhoods, with the impact and the amount of dollars that the millions of dollars you're going to put in, it kind of reminds me of an urban renewal light. And I lived through that experience. And I have to tell you that the results of that whole urban renewal light, or urban renewal as an initiative, has mixed results for all the efforts and monies that were used. And so there's still a sense of, well, I hope you're successful, but to see all of a sudden everything emphasized on 4 communities or 5 or eventually 10, whatever the number may be, there's great expectation, and obviously this administration has a very short time span in its implementation. If there's one thing I realize being in Congress as long as I have been, when administrations change, initiatives change. And so I think that's a truism that I've seen not only in housing, but transportation, energy, and water, etc. And so that creates for me a little bit of hesitancy and a little bit of doubt in terms of it's a great initiative. It's almost at the end of an administration where I saw success with Hope 6. So I just, that is probably what causes me to have a little angst about the Hope Choice Neighborhood Program.
Yeah.
Because I've seen the results of other programs in the past, and they had mixed results, and so that's my situation with Choice Neighborhoods. And you might respond to it.
So I guess I would say 2 things in response to that. One is, I think what we tried to do here is take the best of Hope 6. Hope 6 was incredibly successful in lots and lots of places. There were places where it didn't engage, the police, local anchor institutions, other institutions in the community enough, or it didn't get enough of a mixed income. It also just focused on public housing, and there may have been a dilapidated privately owned property across the street or foreclosed homes or other things in the surrounding neighborhood that limited its success. And so I think what we tried to do is take the best lessons from Hope 6 and make that sort of standard practice in choice neighborhoods. That's one thing. The other thing is we really are different from urban renewal.
In the terms then where you had all the neighborhoods in this country had a shot at some money, you said, no mas, we're just going to limit it to the ones we choose. Basically, it's choice neighborhoods.
Well,
I mean,
Hope
isn't
6
that
was
the reality?
No. Hope 6 was about the same amount of money per grant. There was just more money, and if we had more money for choice neighborhoods, we could reach a lot more neighborhoods. In fact, in some ways, we're reaching more neighborhoods because we're doing planning grants as well. So we've reached dozens of other communities with small amounts of money to help them get going. And I think that goes to my second point, which is the big difference here, I think, between choice neighborhoods and urban renewal is this is a locally driven process. What we're looking for in our competition is, do you have strong groups in your community with a very clear vision of what you want to do? And that's why for every dollar we're putting in, there are 8 other dollars that they're bringing to the table. That's what gives me hope that when the administration ends, that these projects are going to keep going, is because most of the money isn't ours. Most of the money is being raised locally. It's being driven by local planning groups, and there is strong momentum, whether or not I'm here or, obviously HUD will continue to be involved, but this is really a locally driven effort. What's their vision for the neighborhood? What's the community's vision for the neighborhood? Not us coming in like urban renewal and saying, well, you got to knock down everything and build the exact same public housing project in every single neighborhood in the country. And I think that's really the approach we've tried to take.
Well,
and that follows on Hope 6. It takes the example from that.
But I guess where I don't have as much hope is that the reality is that most of the money that's being wrapped around through these once the planning grants are done and the initiative, most of that money, as I see it, maybe I'm wrong, but at least as I see it, is, as you explained, grants from justice, grants from education, grants from transportation, and so there's a great reliance on federal money to ensure that this neighborhood choice project or plan is implemented and successful. I mean, maybe you and I see it differently, but that's how I see it.
A huge share of that is private money, though, too. Just like with Hope 6, the biggest amount of money that you're bringing in is private money, and that's a big part of what drives the success, too, is you have other folks build. Maybe what we could do is give you a little bit of a side-by-side of a typical Hope 6 project, typical choice neighborhoods, and how they're the same and how they're different, and that might help on this point.
We'll bring your model with houses and model cars, and, and maybe my math at ASU will also improve.
If you have anything else, okay. Okay. Not to beat a dead horse here, but
Please.
did you try to find the $1.3 billion this year? Did you ask OMB to come up with it, or what happened?
We looked hard. You know as well as I do the limitations on under the Murray-Ryan budget, and we simply could not figure out how to find an additional $1.3 billion without huge damage to other programs. So we felt, in that context, this was the best choice. And I really do believe that if we go to, this is a funding cycle that works in vouchers. We provide all the money on the fiscal year, well, actually the calendar year, January 1. So we do believe that this is workable.
Okay. Getting back to the rental assistance demonstration, you're talking about taking, currently have an authorized cap of 60,000. You said there's 180,000 units waiting to enter the program. You want to completely eliminate the cap. I don't know how we have any kind of certainty on budget going forward if you have no cap or there's no containment of it. Do you have a suggestion?
But I think,
how do we write appropriation bills to do that?
given what you've done, you have basically required that we take $1 of public housing money and move it either into the project-based Section 8 account or into the voucher account if they're project-based vouchers. It's been about 50-50. And the way you've written it, the additional the renewal of that shows up in the following year. So we would continue to budget in the way that we've been doing to put in our budget the expected cost in the following year. But on a net basis, the cost should be zero, because you're taking $1 out of the public housing account and putting it either in the voucher account or the project-based Section 8 account.
So how do we add additional units to the project base if we are unable to support, the 12 months of funding for the existing units that we have today?
Because money will be freed up out of public housing to create room for that.
There won't be any additional demand outside of this.
Again, any unit, the additional demand, even if every unit of public housing came in, we'd still have the dollars from the public housing account that you could move into the voucher account or to the project-based Section 8 account. That's what we did with the first 60,000 units, and I think it's been working effectively. We've been able to budget for those in future years. And again, on a net basis, there's no additional federal cost.
And you are going to have the authorizers do this, right?
We would love to.
She's smiling.
I will not guarantee for you today.
Straight face back there.
She's confident.
Confident. Good.
But not confident enough that we didn't include it in our 2015 budget proposal.
Not
How's that?
totally confident. Okay.
But he said it like 180,000.
I don't know. The gentleman wants to know if you'd sell it for 180,000.
I think the problem is that we know that we have more housing authorities that are interested. So lifting the cap entirely would be, I think if we could talk about $2 250,000 or more, it would give us room to be able to continue to take additional, no, but seriously, we have other housing authorities that we know are coming in, want to come in, and if we just did 180,000, we would only deal with what we had in-house as of December 31st.
Would you, just as the last question here, request if you could provide the committee with like a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year cost projection that assumes you receive the authority you're asking?
Yep.
And that all the conversions are the project-based platform. So if you could give us some kind of
Happy to do
projections like that. So.
And what we can also do is provide the public housing numbers, which show the corresponding reduction.
And you'll also provide the $1.3 billion makeup
If I had it, I would.
that we have to find.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have you found it?
No, not yet, but I'm looking in my pockets. I have, anyway. We want to, do you have anything additional, Mr. Pester?
If absent the RAD, you're now letting public housing authorities use capital, housing capital money and interchangeably with operating funds. How's that working out? I know you've had smaller PHAs do it.
That's exactly
Now
right.
you would let more do it. Would this, is this an alternative now to expansion of RAD?
We don't see it as an alternative. We see it as flexibility. As you said, housing authorities that are less than 250 units already have this flexibility. And this is one of the innovations from moving to work that we think has been successful, and so we're trying to expand that to other housing authorities. But even if they can blend or move money between the operating fund and the capital fund, it doesn't give them the ability to go and raise private capital in the same way that RAD does. So it's not a substitute in that sense.
That's it. Thank you very much, Mr. Pastor, and thank you for your time today, Mr. Secretary. I know we'll have a number of questions for the record, and I'm sure I will, and other members of the subcommittee will also. I'd ask that you and your staff work as quickly as possible to get those answered, cleared, and returned to us within 30 days if possible. We are going to be on a fast track, getting our bill done, well, hopefully.
Especially when we bring that $1.3 billion
That's right.
check.
Just, you can, slightly use $20 bill, fine, whatever. And it will really help us, if we get those responses to help us write the FY15 bill. I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow at 10 a.m. when we meet with a number of the DOT intermodal administrators. So with that, thank you very much for your testimony, and the hearing is adjourned.
See you next week.
Right.
I did. Kind of just answer the question and just hear back next week. Are you sleeping better now?
A little bit. You guys gonna let me sleep at 11?
Well, we're working on it. Yeah, you got.
I think I can still log into that.
It's just like a my thing, you know. It's,
I'm pretty sure they never took away my rights on that.
they may not have.
I'm Neelan. Sorry, Doug. This is Karen. This is our chief of staff.
How you doing?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Good.
Eddie, this is our chief of staff.
Oh, how you doing? How you
Nice to
doing?
meet you.
Likewise.
Doug Bobbitt works this way. Oh, you just bothering me. This is my profession that I bother.
We're trying to help Laura have a more stable life.
That's right. Doug trying to take care of me.
Well, we're working.
I haven't succeeded yet, but I feel like you might be interested in this.
I haven't succeeded.
If I could get a letter by 5 p.m. Like,
Yeah, but look
from
at
6 p.m. until
think of it this
Thursday.
way. Remember when we sat in the Lincoln's office several days ago?
I remember.
Okay. Now think about then and today, the gap in between. And you got to say, how you can put different colors and numbers on it, but you got to say there's some modest progress.
There's a lot of
Progress
progress,
is
right?
progress, yeah.
There's a lot of progress, and we're talking about whether we need to start typing a letter.
We all got to work. We all got to remember that all of us, no exceptions, we all work in a dysfunctional environment. That's just the way it is. Right?